Okay, here's an update on a very, very, very high-stakes legal drama that has been unfolding while we have been on the air tonight. Not a lawyer, don't even play one on TV, but let me try to summarize what's just happened here. This is a big deal. Last night, you might remember, we reported on a dramatic courtroom showdown that happened in Washington, in which a federal district court judge just raked a Trump administration lawyer over hot coals in court, demanding to know why the Trump administration had not complied with an earlier court order from that same judge that commanded the Trump administration to restart foreign aid funds that they had unilaterally cut off. The judge ruled from the bench yesterday, issued what's called a motion to enforce that told the Trump administration they really did not have a choice on this matter. That court order had to be respected. They had to restart that funding by midnight tonight. Well, today, the Trump administration went to the federal appeals court in Washington to try to have that ruling overturned. The appeals court said, no dice, we're letting that judge's order stand. You have to start those funds flowing by midnight. Well, since we have been on the air, the Trump administration went to the last court above that. They went to the U.S. Supreme Court to ask the Supreme Court to overturn the judge's ruling so they won't have to release these frozen funds. Well, now, just in the last few minutes, the United States Supreme Court has weighed in. The Trump administration rushed to the Supreme Court ahead of this midnight deadline. This hour, the Supreme Court has responded. The court ordered the lower court ruling, quote, stayed pending further order of the undersigned or of the court. So what this means is that they do not have to meet the midnight deadline to restart those funds. But the Supreme Court says they've only got until Friday at noon to start briefing them on what's going on here. And then the Supreme Court will make the final call. Watch this space.
I want to bring in NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, who covers the White House for us. David Fahrenthold is a New York Times reporter who's reported some fascinating details about DOJ's work. And Michael Steele is a former RNC chairman, MSNBC political analyst, and co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend. Okay, Gabe, catch us up if you can. I know it was wide-ranging and it went on for a while, but the highlights or at least the news-making elements of that cabinet meeting.
Oh, hi there, Chris. Well, yes, there is a lot to unpack here, but we'll start with those DOJ cuts that you mentioned. It was Elon Musk, as you said, that really started out this cabinet meeting and spoke for the first chunk of it. Then President Trump took over and controlled the rest of the meeting, repeating many of the talking points that we've heard before and defending this shrinking of the federal government. But of course, Chris, this comes as just today we're hearing that the Office of Personnel Management is sending this memo to department heads and agency heads telling them to prepare for large-scale reductions and that all agency heads should be prepared for a large-scale reorganization plan by March 13th. Now, I want to play what some of President Trump had to say defending his cuts to the federal government just a short time ago.
One of the most important initiatives is DOJ, and we have cut billions and billions and billions of dollars. We're looking to get it maybe to $1 trillion. If we can do that, we're going to start getting to be at a point where we can think in terms of balancing budgets, believe it or not, something you haven't heard in many, many years, decades actually. And it's a big, whether it's this year or next year, I think we'll be very close to balancing budgets.
Of course, we should know, Chris, what the president said about cutting nearly $1 trillion, or at least billions of dollars so far. It's unclear exactly how much DOJ has cut because they have not provided extensive evidence to back that up. But I should make some other points, Chris, on a lot that came out of that cabinet meeting. There was also discussion of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. The president, for the first time, bluntly saying that that Ukraine could, quote, forget about NATO membership. Also talking about, he was asked once again what he believed Russia should give up in his negotiations. He said he didn't want to comment on that. So some more discussion about the war in Ukraine. Some other things. The Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, said that when it comes to rising egg prices, that the U.S. was considering importing eggs from other countries and also from Health and Human Services. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says that the U.S. government is monitoring that measles outbreak in Texas. Those are just some of the things that came up during this hour-long cabinet meeting, the first of the administration, which just wrapped up a few minutes ago, Chris.
All right, thank you for that. A nice wrap up. David, I want to play a little bit more of what Elon Musk had to say.
We bring the receipts. So people say, like, well, is this real? Just go to doge.gov. We line item by line item, we specify each item. So, and I should say, we will make mistakes. We won't be perfect. But when we make a mistake, we'll fix it very quickly.
So we have billions and billions and trillions of dollars. Look, you wrote a great investigative story. You dug deep into the cuts. Tell us what you found. Fact check these kinds of statements for us.
Well, what we found was when Doge started that wall of receipts that Musk was talking about, the 5 biggest cuts on that original list were all wrong. And they were wrong in two ways that are important. One, they were wrong in ways that made the cuts seem much, much bigger than they actually were, sometimes by like a factor of 1,000. And also, they were wrong in ways that showed that Doge did not really know what it was looking at. It didn't understand federal contracts. You know, it triple counted one. It mistook billions for millions in another case. They just seemed to be making very basic errors about the data they were dealing with, which raises questions about how they're dealing with a lot of other data where, you know, that we can't see them using.
So, Michael, I mean, the other thing that strikes me is that both Elon Musk and President Trump talk about these people who are not even alive or who never maybe were alive and who are getting paychecks. But I'm still waiting to see something posted on that site that says, we have found this number of people. Look, clearly, the cabinet secretary sat there and listened to Elon Musk, unconfirmed, unelected. What do you make of both the power dynamic, and do you think that the American people are going to buy what they're selling?
I don't know about the latter part so much. I mean, that's changing in quarters as folks on the ground begin to experience more and more of what Doge isn't. It is not a government efficiency operation. It is not, designed to spare those who are directly impacted by these decisions. But the first part is notable, Chris, in so many ways. You have this unelected man standing there dominating the room. He is the most important person in that room, and that includes the president of the United States.
You really believe that he is more important than Donald Trump?
The fact that he was the first to speak, that the president didn't set the tone for the meeting, the president didn't lay out why they were there and what and then say, let's talk about some of the things that we're doing. This is where we start. The second thing that, for me, that's important to note, that this sort of crazy question is, so some of y'all are upset with Musk and what he's doing. Who are you, right? We all know who they are. It's been reported who they are. It's been reported that certain departments have told their folks, ignore that last email that came from this idiot about telling you what you did last week, right? So the fact that that question was asked was designed to check them. And the fact that they just sat there like little lemmings and applauded the moment that more and more of their power was sucked away from them and affirmed by Elon Musk standing there is significant. Now, I know a lot of folks are going to, take exception to what I said about who the most powerful man in that room is. But I'm sorry, I'm watching the dynamics. I'm listening to how this is laid out. If I'm the president of the United States, I'm not letting him talk first. I'm not letting him stand up over my table. And I'm damn sure not letting him come into my house wearing his hat, which again shows, that he can get away. Yeah, the MAGA stuff on the headline. But if you're serious about how you're going to streamline the government and make the government more efficient, then you put serious people in place to do that. You don't have unelected individuals, 19-year-olds, going and inserting themselves into these institutions in a way in which, to be honest, on the back end of this, we don't know what Musk and his team is planting inside our government systems that they can access through back doors later on. We don't know that. And to the listing of all the, quote, savings, well, we've already shown that that's a lie. And so it's just this cabinet moment reminded me of the first Trump cabinet, when he had everyone sit around the table and tell him how much they loved him. This is the next version of this, is telling them not only how much we love you, but how loyal we are to you, but especially to what Doge is trying to do in the form of Elon Musk.
Yeah, so Michael, there's been some back and forth over the last several days about who actually is in charge of Doge, but also Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's the chair, right, of the Doge subcommittee. She's making headlines for the criticisms that she has of Democrats who have been defending the federal workforce against allegations that, you know, they're a bunch of slackers or they need to justify their existence. Anyway, let me play what she had to say.
You can protest all you want, but the American people disagree with you. You're protecting the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is not a business. Those are not real jobs producing federal revenue. By the way, they're consuming taxpayer dollars. Those jobs are paid for by the American tax people who work real jobs, earn real income, pay federal taxes, and then pay these federal employees. Federal employees do not deserve their jobs. Federal employees do not deserve their paychecks.
Maybe I'm confused, but isn't she a federal employee, Michael? I'm pretty sure
she's a federal. Yes. She's the level of stupid there is untenable, and the fact that she's the chair of this subcommittee should tell you everything you need to know. She is a federal employee. The American people don't agree with what's happening. Every piece of polling that's coming out shows a significant majority, which tells me Republicans don't agree with this. And I want her to go have that town hall meeting and look the poor folks in her district in the eye and tell them that the federal employees that are helping to provide their grandmama's Social Security and the SNAP food program receipts that they're getting, that they're unworthy and they're not significant and important. So this is where we are, Chris, and the country's going to have to grapple with the wholesale onslaught against the government and the mess that's being left in its wake, because this is not going to get undone easily. As long as you have individuals like that sitting with power and control over how this plays out.
So, David, look, we don't know how much money is being saved, if any money is being saved, and it's been pointed out multiple times that it's a very small part of the budget that goes to federal employees anyway. So if you're really serious about saving money, you look elsewhere. Having said that, do we know how much Elon Musk has benefited from the kinds of government spending that he's now trying to cut?
He's benefited hugely. Elon Musk has billions and billions of dollars worth of contracts. First of all, he used government subsidies to get started at Tesla. There was sort of key government subsidies that helped him get that company off the ground. But also he gets billions of dollars of contracts mostly with his company SpaceX to launch rockets, to provide satellite internet service. He is a major government contractor. So yes, he's cutting budgets he's trying to cut budgets across the government. But so far I haven't seen any indication that he's cutting something that would mean less revenue for his business.
Today we're learning about the death of a child in Texas. It's the first death from measles in this country in a decade. It was an unvaccinated child in West Texas, where an outbreak with at least 124 reported cases since late last month. The death is particularly alarming since America declared measles eliminated a quarter century ago, thanks to tireless research and mass vaccination efforts. Now it's back. And today, our brand new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., probably best known for spreading anti-vaccine propaganda, is in charge.
We're watching it, and there are about 20 people hospitalized, mainly for quarantine. We're watching it. We put out a post on it yesterday, and we're going to continue to follow it. Incidentally, there have been 4 measles outbreaks this year. In this country last year, there were 16. So it's not unusual. We have measles outbreaks every year.
Well, no, that's not quite true. Actually, first of all, it's only February, but it is highly unusual. A child is dead from a disease that has not killed anyone in this country for 10 years. That is unusual. It's also not true that the 20 hospitalized kids are there mainly for quarantine. What the head of HHS said to the nation about a measles outbreak was not true. According to the chief medical officer in Lubbock, Texas, they're being treated. All were admitted because, quote, they were having trouble breathing. This is a real nightmare scenario. Something people warned about as Donald Trump floated tapping RFK Jr. to lead HHS, pointing to his involvement in a deadly measles outbreak in Samoa back in 2019. Listen to this from a PBS documentary.
Yeah, I'm aware there was a measles outbreak, but I didn't have anything, I had nothing to do with people not vaccinating in Samoa. I never told anybody not to vaccinate. I didn't, go there for any reason to do with that.
One News has learned of a high-level anti-vax meeting just before this deadly measles outbreak, a meeting between vaccination critic Robert Kennedy Jr. and anti-vax blogger Taylor Winterstein.
That right there is the guy charged with monitoring this new measles outbreak here in the U.S. after the first death in a decade from a disease once considered eradicated. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Dr. Peter Hotez, the co-director of the Center for Vaccine Development at Texas Children's Hospital, also a dean of the National College of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College, author of The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, a Scientist's Warning, and he joins me now. Doctor, it's great to have you. It's under terrible circumstances. You have been working on vaccines, battling vaccine disinformation, and warning about it in Texas, specifically where you live and work, for over a decade now. What's your reaction to all this?
Yeah, this is heartbreaking, Chris. I mean, this is a school-age child who was unvaccinated. This child did not have to lose his or her life. And the problem is we're still in the early stages of this. This is a very large and dangerous measles epidemic. The reported number of cases is over 100, 124. It's now spilling over into the adjacent county in New Mexico. Possibly it'll go up into Oklahoma. This is still in the early stages because remember, the measles incubation period is 2 weeks. So this is what we're hearing about now, but we're going to have to wait 2 weeks to see what the next crop is. So this is likely hundreds of cases. A lot of them are not going diagnosed. Kids are piling into the hospital, and the worst nightmare of all, having a measles death. 20% of kids with measles in the United States require hospitalization, Chris. Jesus. And they don't do it for quarantine. They do it for measles pneumonia, which is a giant cell pneumonia, which is a life-threatening infection. They do it for measles diarrhea, which causes acute dehydration. They do it for measles encephalitis, which is life-threatening. They do it. They're hospitalized for deafness resulting from measles otitis, ear infection, and hospitalization. This is a bad actor, and I'm really concerned that this thing is continuing to accelerate and expand.
You know, one of the things we've seen in Texas, we have this chart of the sort of exemptions from vaccination, personal belief exemptions over time. You can see them just skyrocket up, obviously. And when you get below that 95% herd immunity, that's where, the outbreak here in this case started in the Mennonite community. They don't have a theological objection, I should note, to vaccination. But because it's a community where people don't go to public schools, they're not running into the vaccine requirements. There's low vaccination rates. And it just strikes me that, this is why herd immunity is so important, right? Because if you have herd immunity, then if you have a small religious community that's sort of outside of the public school system, they're protected by everyone else's herd immunity.
Well, it's starting in a small religious community that really has no prohibitions against vaccinations. I mean, what's happening is in Texas, we have a very aggressive, predatory anti-vaccine lobby that actually receives PAC money, Political Action Committee money, to do their work. And that really concerns me. And so even though it's starting in the Mennonite community, it's expanding pretty rapidly, I think, into other parts of West Texas where vaccination rates are also low. And it's the parents themselves are in some ways victims there because they were targeted by anti-vaccine activists for this purpose.
We obviously have an anti-vaxxer now who is the head of HHS. And there's three headlines I saw today. HHS halts oral COVID vaccine trial. Kennedy has paused a multi-million-dollar contract from the Biden administration to create a new COVID-19 vaccine that can be taken orally. So for folks that don't like shots, and there's some evidence to suggest shots are actually a fairly big impediment, they've paused that. Bloomberg today, Trump team weighs pulling funds for Moderna bird flu vaccine, part of a government push to examine spending on RNA-based vaccines. That contract's already signed. It's unclear they could take the money back, but that's happening. And then this last one, FDA flu shot meeting canceled. Food and Drug Administration Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting scheduled for March to select the strains be included in next season's flu shot has been canceled, a panel member said Wednesday.
So I want to encourage Pennsylvanians to speak up, to use their voices, to do it constructively, to not retreat. This is a moment to make your voices heard.
Some extreme members of the Michigan legislature are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn marriage equality. Here's my response to that. Hell no.
I'm here to say New York hasn't labored under a king in over 250 years. And we are not. We sure as hell are not going to start now.
My oath is to the Constitution of our state and of our country. We don't have kings in America, and I don't intend to bend the knee to one. Tyranny requires your fear and your silence and your compliance. Democracy requires your courage.
They are right now and will continue to be some of the most essential and trusted voices of dissent and opposition in this brand new era. Governors, Democratic governors in state houses all across the country. It'll be up to them largely and others to continue to give voice to the American people who see something profoundly wrong with what is happening, not just in these first few weeks, but most likely over the next 4 years. It's a privilege to bring in Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Nicole.
We played a whole bunch of your State of the State address. I want to play one more piece of sound before we jump into this.
If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control.
Yours is an assessment I've heard from former senior national security officials, but only privately, and you're the only one to say it publicly. Say more about your decision to do that.
Well, I should start by saying that my family escaped the pogroms in Ukraine in the 1880s, and it was when the Russians were coming to kill Jews. And this country, the United States, provided us with the security, safety, opportunity to, well, just to live. And of course, I should point out that it was a public school that gave my great-grandfather an education, and a public service, a public health agency that gave them a place to live. And so I am very grateful to be an American and believe very much in protecting all the rights of the American people. I also built a Holocaust museum with Holocaust survivors here. And I can tell you that in 1933 and 1934, the German Constitutional Republic was converted into a dictatorship in a very short period of time. And, anybody who walks through a Holocaust museum and sees the chronology can see that when rights get taken away, when, the services to people are diminished, when all of a sudden we're favoring one group of people over another, that's a danger that we ought to all pay attention to. I'm seeing that in this country right now, and I needed to speak up. I needed people to hear that. And I think that, we're seeing gradually an understanding that we've got to speak up. People need to show up and speak out.
What is it like to be a Democratic leader in a moment where the people, the only people standing up for the rule of law in terms of elected officials and the Constitution and rights, basically equal rights, are Democratic leaders?
Yeah. I'm concerned. People need to speak up now. It's not later. There needs to be a wake-up call. And I do see, you played some of the video and clips from other governors. But it's the people that they represent that are speaking out, showing up at town hall meetings, that are going to make the biggest difference. Meanwhile, you need to see Democratic leadership on this subject. And by the way, Republican leadership, there are plenty of Republicans out there that do not agree with what's going on in Washington, D.C. Now, the elected representatives in Washington who are Republicans are apparently too afraid to say in public what they say in private. They know that Donald Trump is off in the wrong direction. They're just afraid. They're afraid to lose their elections. Democrats shouldn't be afraid. We've got to speak up right now.
Can Democrats protect the rule of law in America by themselves?
You know, it's going to take the judges who are hearing these cases in court. It's going to take Democrats taking those cases to court. It's going to take average folks out there showing up and protesting. Remember what's happening, and you've been talking about this on the program, what's happening to the federal agencies. Now, that's not necessarily a matter of rights, as we would refer to them, but, you know, when you lose the ability to see the person, you know, when you're a veteran, to see the therapist that you've seen for the entire time you've been under therapy as a result of the, you know, the fact that you've served in a war and just need a little bit of help. When you lose that, when you lose, as is happening in my state, we're losing our meat and poultry inspectors. Remember, if you are in the meat and poultry industry, you're trying to sell your goods. You can't sell them if nobody's inspecting them. And by the way, when you go to the grocery store and your prices go up because the supply chain is broken, or when there's contaminated meat or poultry on the shelves because we don't have any more inspectors, those are the rights. Those are the things that people expect to see, and they're not seeing them. And again, we've got to do so much more to speak up and let everybody know across the country that what Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing is wrong for them, bad for working class and working families across the United States, and bad for the most vulnerable people.
I like to always stipulate that it is not the Democratic Party's fault that we are here. But my old party has collapsed onto itself. You have former doctors like Senator Cassidy voting for RFK Jr. You have former prosecutors voting for folks who are not coy about their disdain for the rule of law. So I just want to put that out as pretext. But I went back and I watched your speech and a bunch of other addresses from the Democratic Convention, including Adam Kinzinger's. And all of the things that you and Republicans warned would come to pass have come to pass. Why do you think those warnings didn't sink in the time frame of an election?
You know, you got to remember that the things that I'm speaking out about now, about, you know, the threat to our democracy, this is not a message to win elections on. It's something people need to know. They need to know that that's happening. But, you know, if you talk to 100 people, knock on 100 doors, and I've knocked on an awful lot of doors running for office, and you say to people, you know, democracy is at risk, nobody knows what that looks like. They've never experienced it before.
Yeah.
And the reality is what people need to hear about is what the effects of that are. The prices at the grocery store are going up because democracy is being taken away. The impact on you in terms of your health care, 770,000 people in Illinois will lose health care as a result of what Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the Republican Congress are doing right now. It's a danger to your way of life. And that's what people need to understand. It's all about affordability. It's all about how you can, you know, make it just a little bit easier for people every single day to live their lives. And they're taking that away from you. That is what it's like to have democracy taken away. So those are, you know, we need to bifurcate between educating people about democracy being taken away and talking to people about what the message ought to be about why they need to vote for Democrats.
It's so interesting. I mean, you're right. That is sort of the linkage that was maybe missing, and frankly, it's on the media as well. I wonder if you have any insights about what your constituents are going through that could inform the debates in Washington or the coverage on shows like this.
Well, you know, I went to visit a Head Start program in the suburbs here, suburbs of Chicago, and they had to lay a few people off as a result of the uncertainty of whether they would see the support from the federal government that they've always received. And when they have to lay people off, that means fewer kids can be in their program. And when fewer kids are in the program, that means their parents who can't go to work because their child can't go to that program. Now, there are layoffs that are occurring, and they're devastating. Layoffs to government workers. But what about the layoffs that are affecting average folks out there that don't work for the government because they can't get child care, because they can't get the services that they need? It's devastating to families across Illinois and across America. And slowly, but surely, I think people are waking up to see it. But all of us, especially in leadership, need to stand up and speak out and, put the red blinking lights, red alert, like on Star Trek. We are under attack. We, all of us across the United States, everybody is under attack because they want to take services away. You know why? To provide a massive tax cut for the wealthiest and most powerful people in this country. That just seems wrong, and everybody needs to understand it in order to make sure that that they get the impetus to get up, get out there, show up at your town hall meeting, call 202-224-3121. That's the number for the Capitol, and ask to speak with your congressman's office or your senator's office and tell them, don't take my services away. Don't take away Meals on Wheels. Don't take away Medicaid.
We will make mistakes. We won't be perfect. But when we make a mistake, we'll fix it very quickly. So, for example, with USAID, one of the things we accidentally canceled very briefly was Ebola, Ebola prevention. I think we all want Ebola prevention. So we restored the Ebola prevention immediately, and there was no interruption.
That's not true. Today, Donald Trump's top campaign donor claimed during a weird, filmed for TV cabinet meeting that although he had accidentally, in his role as Donald Trump's top campaign donor, ended all Ebola prevention efforts of the U.S. government, after they realized that's what had happened, it was restarted. It was just a very brief interruption, and it all or not even an interruption. It was very briefly stopped, but then restarted without interruption. People who actually work on these matters for the U.S. government and in this field say none of this is true. Public health experts, including current and former USAID officials, say that the Ebola prevention efforts were hobbled, that they've not been restarted. In 2014, you might remember there was an outbreak of Ebola in West Africa. Doctors from the United States went to countries like Guinea to go track cases and treat patients. A doctor named Craig Spencer was one of those doctors who responded to that outbreak, and he became the first person in New York City to test positive himself for Ebola in October 2014, after he was abroad treating Ebola patients in Guinea with Doctors Without Borders. Ebola has a really high mortality rate. It kills more than half the people it infects. In Dr. Spencer's case, he had 19 days in the hospital, but he survived. Today, he wrote this in response to Elon Musk's remarks about Ebola prevention being accidentally stopped, but then started back up again with no interruption. He said, quote, on January 29th this year, Uganda reported an Ebola outbreak. Normally, the U.S. would have quickly sent one of our Ebola experts to help the response. But this time we didn't, because we couldn't, because this administration wouldn't let them go right when this outbreak was declared. Normally, the U.S. would have helped set up border screening and other measures on the ground, but this time we didn't. Normally, we would have spoken with the WHO about helping end the outbreak, but this time we didn't, because CDC staff weren't even allowed to talk to them. Joining us now is Dr. Craig Spencer. He's Associate Professor of Health Services Policy and Practice at Brown University School of Public Health. He's also the New York City emergency room doctor who survived Ebola after treating Ebola patients in Guinea with Doctors Without Borders nearly about a decade ago now. Dr. Spencer, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you.
Good to see you again.
So it's always good to see you because you had Ebola. And so anytime that I see you, I feel like I have hope that these sorts of things can be survived, these horrific diseases. I have to ask what your reaction was to seeing Elon Musk today bring up Ebola unprompted, laugh about it, and then suggest that while he had accidentally cut off all U.S. government efforts to combat it, everything was fine now because it had all been restarted without interruption.
Well, Rachel, I was remarkably confused because for the past month, I have been talking to people who normally would have responded to this Ebola outbreak in Uganda, the Marburg outbreak in Tanzania, and guess what? They didn't. For the last decade, I have followed every single outbreak of viral hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola. I know everyone that is doing this. I know where they're responding. I know the people in Uganda at the Ministry of Health. I've heard from people who normally would be supported by our country, by our government, to set up border screening, to do the contact tracing on the ground. They're not getting paid. Countries are asking them to work for free because USAID normally would have supported them. Here in this country alone, we normally would have sent people almost immediately once these outbreaks are declared. Guess what? We didn't do this. And the result is right now, people around the world are looking to the United States saying, what are your commitments? What is true about your support? What Elon Musk said today was just categorically untrue. We did not get rid of Ebola prevention and then put it back in place. Elon Musk and Doge were responsible for actively and actually stripping off the letters of the USAID, the agency, from its headquarters in Washington, D.C. On the first day of this administration, Donald Trump signed an executive order to pull the United States out of the World Health Organization. And just very recently, hundreds of CDC workers, those frontline doctors and epidemiologists who would be responding to outbreaks like Ebola abroad, Ebola in the United States, and other infectious threats that you've just highlighted, 750 of those people were let go. Regardless of what Elon Musk and others say, we have set ourselves up to be very sorry for an infectious threat, maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe next year. But I've been saying over and over again, we will regret this.
Can't the United States president use their power to assassinate American rivals, like, say, dissidents, civil rights protesters, or even political opponents, and then claim that that's part of their job so they're legally immune? The answer has always been no. But it's back in the news tonight as Trump officials and nominees face the process of ongoing vetting. We showed you the cabinet meeting. Some people have been, of course, confirmed. Well, today, the Senate grilled John Sauer. Now, he has been picked for a very important DOJ post, the one called Solicitor General, where you argue before the Supreme Court on behalf of the United States. If you watched this program a lot, you might have seen past Solicitors General like Neil Katyal. It's a big job. The name is familiar for the reason I mentioned, because this individual does have the relevant experience. I've told you about officials who don't. He does. He's a lawyer who has litigation experience and has argued previously before the Supreme Court, including on behalf of then-defendant Donald Trump in the notorious case that was trying to seek new and broader immunity for a former president. The headlines were bad. The open discussion, the advocacy, really, of legal immunity even for assassinations in the United States. And that was a source of major grilling at the hearing today.
Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
He could order the use of his office to use violence against a political opponent, and you would defend his ability to do that in any criminal prosecution unless he's impeached. Is that your testimony?
The hypothetical you've offered respectfully is so outlandish. I don't know if I'm in position to address it.
Well, you addressed it for the court, but you won't address it for the country in this hearing?
I think I've just said exactly the same response that I gave
Okay, then
the court,
exactly the same response is that you would evidently defend him.
Is it outlandish? You can watch a congressional hearing and say, oh, these are the politicians, but as was correctly pointed out, and we played you the archival court sound so you can remember, this came up from a judge quite seriously because, remember, the places that presidential actions are tested are not in the main heart of legitimate activity, like enforcing the law or making hard foreign policy decisions. They're tested at or outside the bounds. For example, a former president who has been returned to office, Donald Trump, was caught trying to overthrow a lawful election. And so there was a federal case about it. As you know, with the immunity granted in this matter, then defended Trump, presumed innocent at the time under our system, never went to trial. But the question was about overthrowing the election, not conducting traditional foreign policy or a meeting with your own employees. And so Sauer saying it's outlandish is itself not very credible. And he's not the only person who's defended Donald Trump on criminal allegations now getting the ultimate reward, a top government job. We can show you Trump appointees who have been selected and are in or slated to be in top government positions, from the Attorney General of the United States to her deputy to the current acting deputy. So that's the three people who run the DOJ effectively. To Solicitor General, as I just told you, one of the top DOJ posts dealing with the Supreme Court, to White House counselors, staff secretary, and the VA. Pam Bondi defended Trump at the very first impeachment trial, which again was about allegations not of legitimate foreign policy, but a shakedown or bribe of a country that continues to be very important on the world stage, Ukraine. Todd Blanche, up tomorrow for Deputy AG, defended the president in that New York case. Emil Bove worked on those cases and is up at DOJ, the others that you see in those key offices. Remember, everybody has the right to counsel in our country, and that obviously includes Donald Trump, the former president. And you've never heard on this program any suggestion that he shouldn't have his legal counsel, that he's legally presumed innocent, that he can hire the best lawyers he can get. That's all fine. But you pay those lawyers and you move on. What we're seeing here is a level of repeat public rewarding with not Donald Trump's money, this is important, with your money, with taxpayer dollars, and a type of loyalty or partisanship being pushed at very powerful public posts.
They are here saying that the president must be impeached and removed from office for raising a concern.
The jury should have found President Trump not guilty. I mean, in my soul, I believe that.
We're here because of something that happened when he was in the White House that wasn't even wrong.
We'll never stop fighting because we will stop the steal.
That reference to stopping the steal is a false statement about an election that was lawfully determined to be lost by President Trump, the outgoing president, and won by President-elect Biden. That's Ed Martin. Now, he defended January 6 defendants and later convicts, but he was at that Stop the Steal rally, which, of course, was the public precursor on the eve of what became an insurrection. Now he's the top D.C. prosecutor, which most legal experts, regardless of party, think is completely upside down. And he, breaking all traditions and demands of public, nonpartisan, rule of law tradition, says, no, I'm just Trump's lawyer, still here. DOJ attorneys do not represent the president. The DOJ is also trying to take the pardons that Trump issued, which are opposed by most Americans, and broaden them to defend even more criminal conduct. You take this all together, and you have something troubling on our hands. And you have the rewarding of these individuals. And you have an effort to take your government that your tax dollars support, that is supposed to be neutral, independent, and nonpartisan, and turn it into something else. So, I've told you before, these are a bundle of stories and developments that sometimes the White House does not want you to see. They're doing other counter-programming.
Uncharted territory, and it's incredibly dangerous. As a former federal prosecutor, I took an oath, but that oath was about the United States. My client was not any president, it wasn't any individual, it was justice. And what's so dangerous when we look at, for example, A.G. Bondi, is the concept that she could be testing her loyalty, picking between what is best for the American people and what is best for President Trump. And that conflict, if President Trump wins, the American people lose. And the other thing I'll add is one of the roles that we've seen here in the decline of the rule of law with this current president, is that it is pervasive everywhere. We are seeing it from how the Gen 6 pardons are being expanded. We're seeing it when a U.S. attorney in D.C. is calling himself a Trump lawyer. And this spread across our agencies is incredibly dangerous and unprecedented.